What terrifying confession has someone told you while intoxicated? Story 1. I was at a bar one night in an affluent town. An old guy next to me started talking about his sailing days. He had a 60-foot sailboat and used to sail all over North and South America. His story was from the mid 1980s. He said one night he was anchored near an island off the coast of Venezuela. He was with his girlfriend and they had just fallen asleep when he heard a bump. At first, he didn't think much of it, barely noticed it, but decided to check it out. He left the sleeping berth, and, like in most sailboats, there are a set of steep stairs to climb to get from the cabin to the aft deck. He said he always kept a pistol holstered and hanging from the side of the stair rail. As an afterthought, he grabbed his pistol as he was climbing the stairs. Once he was about halfway out on deck, he saw a man coming over the railing with an automatic weapon, like an assault rifle, AR-15 or something like that. He said he put 2 rounds into the guy, and he fell back over the railing. He ran over and looked down. The guy had fallen into his boat, and there was another guy there, also armed with an assault rifle. He said he shot that guy a couple of times, pulled up the anchor, and got out of there. He said that pirate activity was not unheard of around there, and people like this would board your boat, tie you up, and take everything. Then they would torch the boat with you on it. The bump he had heard was the other boat coming up beside his boat. He said that was his last visit to South America. Story 2. Not terrifying, more depressing. A few years ago, my dad came to me while he was a bit tipsy and tried to talk to me about my depression. Back then, it was very new to us, and it was a struggle to open up about it. When out of the blue, he started sobbing. Keep in mind, I'd never seen my dad cry before. He tells me that him and my mom met while she was a stripper, and he was a bartender at the same club, that he always regretted where they came from. They also used substances before they got pregnant with me, and how he wished he could take the pain away from me and deal with it himself, because he knew how it felt. He talked about how he was so desperate to make sure our family was financially stable and happy that he would have done anything to take the depression away. Before that, I'd only ever seen him as a slightly annoying dad and didn't bond with him much. After, though, I took the time to really get to know him as more than just my dad. Now he's my best friend. In a way, him being tipsy that afternoon and opening up to me is the reason I have such a healthy relationship with him. Story 3. Freshman year of college, among all the new friends I made that year, there was one guy who was always a goofball. Very laid back, casual, down for whatever. The biggest red flag we got from him was that whenever people were drinking and hanging out, he would always essentially black out. He drank way too much and would kind of spaghetti noodle his way around the party, while also intoxicated after the party had winded down one night. A few people and I asked him why he always goes so damn hard. While dropping his head a ton, sloshing around, and slurring everything, he told us about how a few months ago, the summer before college started, his best friend called him. They lived in a small town by the beach, and his friend asked him to come meet him to watch the sunset by the water. He biked over there, sat down, and they talked for a while. Everything seemed fine. Then his friend took out a pistol and shot himself in the head, killing himself instantly. Apparently, my friend had to call the police while covered in blood, brains, and skull fragments, just totally in shock. And then a few weeks later, he went off to college a few states away, still in shock and unable to sleep or focus on anything. He didn't remember telling us that story, and I don't think any of us wanted to bring it up. His drinking habits didn't change until he was about to graduate, by which point he started going to therapy, got a job right after graduation, and seems to be doing better in the years since, thank God. Story 4. Ages back, I was helping a blackout drunk coworker to his apartment, etc. He was needing to be carried one second and sprinting across the parking lot the next. As we're getting close to his room, he starts breaking down, "Why did I hit him? I shouldn't have run," etc. Turns out drunk Diego is pretty convinced he hit a kid with his car one day. Sober Diego has no idea what he was talking about. Story 5. A friend of mine likes to drink a lot, but he knows he has a limit because when he goes over it, he becomes very talkative. He also doesn't date at all, and for a long time we all wondered why. He's a good-looking guy. He's really nice. He's fun to be around, when he isn't drinking anyway. Never wants to date. Well, one time he got absolutely crap-faced, and I found out why. It turns out that when he was a kid, he saw his aunt murder his uncle in cold blood. Ever since, he's been terrified of being alone with a woman and feels like he could never truly be safe around them. Story 6. Was invited over to a coworker's place to hang out. Dude is crap-faced and shirtless rambling by the time I arrived, and this was 2 p.m. on a Monday. I didn't know how to get out of the situation, so I followed him, and thinking maybe he would clean up and pour some coffee and try to sober up. He kept drinking and started going on about what a POS he is, his words. He was talking about his criminal record and past and all the things he thought were okay. Talked about how he's going to court for threats against former employers. And he was just acting erratic, and I did not feel safe at all. After a while of figuring out how to get out of there, without potentially making him angry or upset, I faked a phone call and left after about an hour. I spent most of that time actually afraid of what he might do. I've seen what happens when people are in that state. Story 7. My grandpa never talked about his Korean War service. He had severe PTSD, though, would wake up in the middle of the night screaming. Then one night he came home absolutely crappicked, laid down on the couch, then told me that his entire unit had been wiped out before his eyes. He was the sole survivor and got caught behind enemy lines, but made it out. He was their sergeant and blamed himself. He eventually got into veterans therapy in his 60s. Story 8. They didn't tell me this while they were drunk, but I think it fits here. I am a volunteer at a nursing home. When one of the female residents was close to death, she confided it to me. One time, her husband cheated on her with the neighbor's wife. When the neighbor's husband found out, he was very upset and was going to physically hurt her husband. They worked out a deal where the neighbor's husband would not hurt her husband if he was able to return the favor. In essence, her husband agreed to let the neighbor have her in order to save himself a righteous beating. It gets worse. She later became pregnant and told her husband for the rest of his life that it was his. But she honestly believed it to be the neighbor's. Her whole life, she was carrying this burden about her son and what her husband had done to her, both with the cheating on her and with trading her off like a cow. It was truly a heartbreaking conversation. Story 9. My brother got terribly drunk 2 years ago at Thanksgiving, like 7 or 8 Sam Adams, and he was fine at first. Then he started sobbing, and I was the one to comfort him for more than 3 minutes. He confided in me about his thoughts and how he fought with his friends about their relationships and how happy they are and wished he could have that too. Maybe fighting is the wrong word, like he felt happy that they were happy, but was sad that he wasn't happy like that too. He said he was too scared to do it because then I would be alone. It was the turning point where I could finally get him to get on antidepressants. He also brought up something from when we were like 6, and he put gum in my hair and we had to cut my hair off, and he was sobbing over this, calling himself a terrible brother and that I didn't deserve him. I didn't even remember that happening, and I ended up with short hair anyways, so I don't really care. He's doing way better now and hasn't ever gotten that drunk again. Love my brother, man. I'm gonna go give him a hug. Story 10. This was about 6 months ago now. My brother and I were getting drunk one night because it was the weekend, and we just wanted to have fun and play video games. We had done plenty of shots and plenty of drinks, and we were the definition of drunk. We were having fun playing some old YW zombies for nostalgia, and we paused it to grab some chips. As I was grabbing the salsa, he said to me that he tried to end it about a month prior to this. He had taken some pills and they pumped his stomach and crap, and he told me the whole time he was thinking of me and how crappy and depressed I'd be if he had died, and that he'd never want to lose me. I told him I had also tried ending myself a while ago, and I thought the exact same thing about him. We continued playing zombies while talking about everything under the moon, and we've been talking every day since, have never missed, and will never miss a day. We're both doing a lot better now, and we're both in therapy. It's nice having someone to talk to and trust about these things. Story 11. One time, an old acquaintance, female 49, and I, male 32, were drinking late into the night. She drank much faster than me, and before long randomly and drunkenly confessed to me the following. When her aging and sick mother, whom she despised, and was a ton of unappreciated work to care for, was left in her care, she intentionally withheld certain medications and gave her too much of other ones, with the plan being to kill her off. It worked. She told her other siblings that the illness must have finally gotten to her, and she passed in her sleep. Since she was already old and sick, there was no autopsy. A minute later, she snapped out of it and apologized profusely for telling me that, adding that I am the only person she has ever told. Story 12. My ex in college told me once when he was blackout drunk that a few years prior, he and a bunch of other kids broke into a house to have a party. The family that lived there was on vacation or something, and were all gone. Well, I don't know how they picked the house or knew it'd be empty, sorry. It's been like, wow, 12 years, and I forgot some details. They all got drunk, and someone decided it would be fun to break a picture on the wall. Then someone else did, too. Eventually, it devolved into them all destroying the house. Absolutely everything they could. All the windows were broken, broke the legs off all the chairs, and used them to beat holes into the walls. ripped and stole clothing, ripped or burnt all the family photos on the walls and crap. I don't remember all the stuff he said that they broke, but I remember him crying and saying that they ruined those people's lives, and there's no way to make it right. I honestly think he was so messed up that he doesn't remember telling me, because we never mentioned it. Anyway, like 2 years later, he punched me in the face for asking for a ride to work, one too many times. So I guess he was a piece of crap regardless of current situation or alcohol intake. Story 13. A group of local kids did this to my grandparents' cottage. My grandparents weren't wealthy, just grew up when the average family could afford a cottage home up the state along the water. They broke in and stole stuff and had parties over the course of several weeks. During one of their parties, a fire got out of control. The kids burned the place down. We lost everything. Every item is tied to memories, all gone. These kids, now young men, one serving jail time for repeated burglaries, also would shoot fish in barrels and kill a litter of kittens by torturing them to death. My cousins and I growing up there on weekends were encouraged to play with them. We had to explain over and over again they were not good people and they scared the crap out of all five of us. Then they burned our place down years later. Full circle, I guess. Story 14. I had a friend who told me that his girlfriend dumped him because they got into a huge fight when they were drunk, and she was convinced he threatened her with physical violence. He said he was saying things out of frustration, like, and all that, but he was sitting the whole time, and she was the one that was yelling and screaming. Weird, but okay. A few weeks later, I meet him up for drinks, and he is absolutely plastered. I walked him back to his place with one of his friends. As we're walking, he starts crying and says that he messed up and that he is a terrible person. We asked him to elaborate, and he tells us that his ex left because he threw her into a mirror and then flipped a coffee table at her. She's okay, a couple bruises, scrapes. Kept my distance after that. Story 15. My former partner told me a story from when she was in high school. She played sports and traveled around because of it. She said that one time they were in this school and had access to the home team's locker room. They went into the girls' locker room and found a locker that was not locked and rifled through the contents. She said that she found a textbook and opened to a page and she took a giant crap in the book, then closed it back up and put it back in the locker and locked the locker up. This was one of the first red flags that she told me while drunk. I mean, what the heck? Story 16. An old friend I grew up with ended up messing around with the wrong crowd for a good few years until they all fell out. Four of them wearing balaclavas went to his door and stabbed him multiple times. When they left, they forgot to shut the door, and someone out walking the dog found him. After I found out about it a few weeks later, I was out drinking with some mates, and a couple guys started talking utter rubbish about stuff until one of them said what he and his mates had done to someone just weeks prior. Honesty crap myself when I put two and two together. Story 17. I was at a bar with a kitchen coworker. He'd apparently been stabbed in some kind of altercation some years ago. Never asked him specifically what it was about, but he struck me as kind of a hippie-ish type dude into fish and widespread panic and such. Seemed like a mild-mannered stoner. So I assumed it had just been some guys messing with him and it escalated further, though I didn't know for sure. This night at the bar, a few shots in, he told me that after the stabbing, while he was in the hospital, his older sister had found the attackers and that they weren't alive anymore, or something to that effect. Went on about how dangerous his sister was and how she was connected to some scary people. The guy actually died a few months ago, out of the blue, from what was said to be a stroke. He was only 38 at the time of his death. He'd been gone from the restaurant we worked at for some time, got let go for drinking on the job. I assume it was just a random thing, or maybe he had undisclosed health issues, but still odd. He was an interesting guy. Story 18. Not 100% sure if the man was drunk or just needing to get it off his chest. Years ago, I waited tables in a family Italian restaurant. A family of 12 came in, had wine, appetizers, dinner, and dessert. After the dinner, the eldest man at the table pulled me aside and asked to pay. We walked over to the register. He said thank you. The service and food were great. Ends up tipping around 40%. I was blown away and said thank you probably 20 times. Anyway, he waited till no one else was around. He leans close and says, "Oh, I was special forces in Vietnam. I had over 300 confirmed kills. In one instance, I had 50 kills in one mission holding off enemy forces. We did some really sadistic crap over there." I've never told anyone about this. I was just so stunned by the randomness and frankly causal way he said it. I couldn't even think of anything to say, so I blurted out a forced thank you for your service with an awkward shoulder pat. Story 19. Had a former friend tell me he killed his brother. Didn't help this while we were trying to herd his drunk butt to the car as he was crying and yelling at the top of his lungs. Amazingly, we didn't end up in cuffs or at the very least get stopped and questioned. Come to find out his brother died of a brain aneurysm, and that morning he prayed for something to happen to get him out of school that day. He always blamed himself for his brother's death, and I get that to a degree. Story 20. On my birthday, I got really wasted drinking at home with friends and let slip my most devastating memory from my time in the military. That's really the source of my PTSD. While in Afghanistan, my unit stumbled upon a stray herd of goats in an area where we regularly met with an informant we knew to be a shepherd. We found a mass of 17 decaying bodies that were the entirety of the man's nomadic clan. It was presumed that the informant was discovered by the Taliban, and they put the entire group to death and left them there to rot. I spent the better part of a week burying the bodies. Some were decapitated, including one child. I think my friends were arguing about Ukraine, and I was just so drunkenly frustrated. None of them had seen the terrifying reality of crap that happens in war. Story 21. Just a warning, this one is kind of gross, and you probably shouldn't read if you're sensitive to animal violence. Freshman year of college, a guy lived in my hall. I'll call him Rick. Rick was a pretty nice guy with a charming personality. He was a little over the top and could be a little too much at times, but people liked him. Fast forward a few months into school, Rick decides to buy a bunny and keep it secretly in his closet as a pet. Rick's roommate's girlfriend was really the one who took care of the bunny, and she loved it very much. This went on for some weeks, but then one day, the bunny was just gone. I asked around what had happened, but no one would tell me. Now for the intoxicated confession part. One night, a few days later, while everyone was drinking, Rick's roommate's girlfriend called Rick out for killing the bunny. So, slowly, myself and a few other drunken teenagers learned that Rick had slowly tortured and killed the bunny over several hours. He was a complete monster, and he confessed to having the desire to kill animals and having done so for a long time. He even went as far as to ask if I would buy him an animal from the pet, as he wasn't allowed to anymore. Honestly, it was a bad situation, and we should have done more to stop it. I really wonder how many more animals he's hurt. Story 22. My dad is a 30-plus year U.S. Army vet. One day last year, we were drinking and playing cards, and at one point, he talked about some of the stuff he had to do when he was in Iraq and Afghanistan with the Army. He hates himself for it, and basically believes his PTSD is his punishment for what he had to do over there, and never said anything else about it. My two siblings and myself keep trying to get him to get professional help or at least talk to us, but he refuses.